Tuesday morning, I watched them walk her out. I was in bed 4 on the VA-affiliated surgical ward at Braywick County Medical Center, 10 days post-op on a knee reconstruction, which meant I was mobile enough to sit up and see through the glass partition that separated the ward from the main corridor. I had nothing to do but look, so I looked. She came down the hallway at 8:14 in the morning, with a cardboard box in her arms and a security guard half a step behind her. The box held the things from her locker: a framed photograph, a stethoscope coiled on top, and something folded flat beneath it that I couldn't identify from where I sat. She was in street clothes. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30, and she walked the way some people do when they've decided that how they carry themselves in a bad moment is the only thing still in their control. Back straight, eyes level, not slow, not hurrying. Behind her, at the far end of the corridor, the CFO stood in his doorway with his arms crossed and his deputy at his shoulder. His name was Aldrin Marsh, and he had been at Braywick County 11 months. He had the posture of a man who had just done something he considered efficient. I'd heard about the firing before I saw it. Word moves fast on a surgical ward when the night staff hands off to the morning crew and somebody's name comes up wrong. Her name was Claire Weston, and she was a traveling nurse on a 3-month contract, which, I gathered, had made the decision cleaner in Marsh's accounting. The violation on paper was this: she had stayed 4 hours past the end of her shift 2 nights before, administering to a coding patient in the step-down unit without a physician cosign, and she had pulled from the supply cabinet without a logged authorization. The patient had stabilized. The patient, as it turned out, was not supposed to survive the night by anyone's projections, but Marsh's audit the following morning found 2 lines of supply usage unaccounted for, a physician's signature that arrived 40 minutes after the intervention, and a nurse who had exceeded her scope in the night without asking anyone's permission. He fired her that morning for the supply irregularity and the documentation gap, walked her out personally, the way some administrators do when they want to feel the weight of a decision they've already made. I watched her pass the glass. She didn't look into the ward. She looked straight ahead, the box steady in both arms, the security guard keeping his distance the way men do when they feel something uncomfortable about an assignment they've been handed. She turned the corner at the lobby doors, and that was the last I saw of her that day. The man in the next bed, Ray, retired Army, a hip replacement that had gone sideways, made a sound under his breath and turned back to his television. Neither of us said anything for a while. "Know her?" I asked, eventually. "Enough," he said. "She checked on me 3 nights running. Sat for an hour the first night when my numbers were bad." He shook his head once. "Knows what she's doing." That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, I had physical therapy in the morning and a visit from my sister in the afternoon, and I didn't think much about Claire Weston. Marsh sent a facility-wide email about supply accountability that nobody on the ward discussed aloud, but the nurses read it at the station with the particular stillness that people adopt when they disagree with something they have no immediate power to answer. Thursday morning, at 9:47, I heard the lobby. I want to be precise about this. The Braywick County main lobby was 1 floor below the ward and down a long corridor, separated from us by 2 sets of double doors. What reached us was not individual voices. It was a register, a low, dense weight of sound that moved through the building the way pressure moves, felt before it's understood. Ray looked up from his breakfast tray. The nurse at the station stood from her chair and looked toward the corridor doors without moving. Then the double doors opened, and they came through. 14 of them, Army dress greens, every one. Some had ribbons on their chests that I recognized from my own years in service, and some had ribbons I did not. They were not in formation. They were walking the way men walk when they know exactly where they're going and have agreed on the purpose without needing to discuss it. The youngest looked about 24. The oldest had the face and hands of a man who had spent his service outdoors and his retirement doing the same. They came through the second set of doors and into the corridor outside the ward, and the sound of 14 pairs of dress shoes on hospital linoleum is a thing you do not forget. Ray had set down his fork. The man at the front, a sergeant major by the insignia, a broad man with close-cropped gray at his temples, stopped at the ward entrance and looked through the glass. His eyes moved across the room methodically. He was looking for someone, and when he didn't find her, He turned to the nurse at the station outside and spoke to her quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched her expression shift from professional courtesy to something that looked like recognition, and then something that looked like relief. She reached for her phone. The 14 men waited in the corridor. They did not pace. They did not check their watches. They stood the way men stand when they have driven a long way for a specific reason, and have enough patience left to see it through. Aldrin Marsh appeared at the far end of the corridor at 10:03. His deputy was with him, the same man who had stood in the doorway on Tuesday, watching the escort. Marsh had the look of someone who had been informed of a situation and had come to manage it before it became more of one. He approached the sergeant major with his hands at his sides and spoke first. I could not hear what Marsh said. I could hear the sergeant major's answer, because the sergeant major did not modulate his voice for the corridor. He spoke at the volume of a man accustomed to being heard in environments considerably louder than a hospital hallway. We're here for Nurse Weston, he said. We'll wait. Marsh said something else. The sergeant major looked at him for a moment. The way you look at a problem you have already solved in your head and are waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She kept 17 of our people alive, the sergeant major said. 6 hours, 1 table, half a supply kit. Kandahar province, November, 6 years ago. The lead surgeon went down in the first hour, and she ran that OR until the extraction team landed. He paused. We drove 4 hours this morning. We'll wait as long as we need to. Marsh's deputy, I could see him clearly, had gone very still. He was a younger man than his boss, and whatever he had expected this morning, it was not this. He looked at the 14 men in the corridor, and then at his CFO, and he looked away. Marsh said something else. His voice had changed register. The sergeant major said, Then you can call her and tell her that. The nurse at the station had been on the phone for 3 minutes. She hung up and looked at the sergeant major and gave him a small nod. He returned at once. Claire Weston arrived at 23 minutes past 10. She came through the lobby doors in civilian clothes again, jeans, a gray pullover, and she stopped when she saw them. 14 men in dress greens, filling the width of the corridor. The youngest ones were the first to come to attention, that clean military snap of heels and spine that is either beautiful or not, depending on what it costs the person doing it. The older ones followed, and then the sergeant major last, and the sound of it, 14 men coming to attention in a hospital corridor, moved through the building the way the first sound had moved, felt in the sternum before the ears caught up. She stood there. She didn't say anything for a moment. The sergeant major took 1 step forward. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a folded document, a single sheet, official header, the words too small for me to read from the ward, but the format unmistakable. A commendation order, the kind that gets written and then filed in the wrong stack, and found 6 years later by someone going through records after a deployment rotation. He had driven 4 hours with it in his pocket. We got the paperwork right this time, he said. The original got lost in the transfer. Took us until last year to find it, and another year to track you down. He held it out to her. You should have had this 5 years ago. She took it with both hands. She read it. You could tell from the way she was looking at it. Not skimming, reading, the way you read something you were not sure you would ever see. When she looked up, her jaw was set, and her eyes were clear, and she looked like a woman who had decided, again, that how she carried herself in a significant moment was the only thing still in her control. All 17? She asked. Her voice was steady. All 17, the sergeant major said. Garcia's running a landscaping company in Tucson. Delacroix made captain. Pemberton's kid just started kindergarten. He let that settle. Every one of them. I had a view through the glass of the corridor, and a partial view of the lobby beyond. Marsh was standing near the far wall. His deputy was beside him. When I looked at the CFO, he was looking at Claire Weston and the 14 men, and he had the expression of a man who has just understood that an efficiency calculation he performed earlier in the week was made with a variable he did not know existed. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The board of directors had their monthly meeting at 10:30 on the second floor, and the sound of 14 men coming to attention carries through a regional hospital the way sounds in a hospital always carry, clearly, through walls, into rooms where people are sitting at tables deciding things. 3 board members came down to the lobby before 11. 2 of them were veterans themselves. They stood in the lobby doorway and took in the sight of 14 men in dress greens, and a young nurse in a gray pullover holding a commendation order in both hands, and I am told neither of them said a word for a long moment. One of them turned and went back upstairs, and that was the last Marsh saw of that particular morning's agenda. I know this because Ray told me. Later, Ray had made it to the doorway on his crutches and seen more of it than I had. What I saw was the sergeant major look once at Marsh, and then turn back to Claire Weston and say, "The hospital's going to want to talk to you. When they're done, if you need anything, references, documentation, whatever they ask for, you call the unit." He reached into his breast pocket again and produced a card. "Any of the 17 will pick up." She took the card. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time I'd heard her voice. It was even and quiet, the kind of voice that sounds the same in a corridor as it does in an OR, not because she was performing calm, but because it seemed to be her actual register. "All of you, thank you for coming." There is a particular sound in a hospital ward when something important has just finished happening. A settling, like a room exhaling. It moved through the corridor, and then the ward, and Ray made it back to his bed in time for his second cup of coffee, which the day shift nurse brought him without being asked. Marsh's office sent a different email that afternoon. I didn't see its contents. I know that by 3 o'clock, Claire Weston's badge had been returned to her, and her contract had been reissued with a 60-day extension. I know this because the day shift nurse told Ray, and Ray told me, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has lived long enough to watch a few reckonings land where they should. I was discharged the following Monday. I have thought about that Thursday often in the years since. Not the large part of it, the sergeant major's voice in the corridor, the 14 pairs of heels coming to attention, but the small part, the cardboard box, the photograph and the stethoscope, and that folded document underneath, the commendation order she'd been carrying with her, the way some people carry things they're not sure they'll ever be asked to produce. She'd had it with her the whole time, in the bottom of that box, and nobody in that building had thought to ask what was in it. Marsh didn't know what he had walked out the door. The 14 men who drove 4 hours on a Thursday morning did. That is the difference, and it is not a small one.